Good evening. It is so wonderful to be here with you tonight to celebrate the feast of St. Mary of Magdala. An honor that is long overdue for sure, but I am grateful to Pope Francis for seeing the light and upgrading her day to a feast. Mary of Magdala. What do we know about Mary of Magdala? From the Gospels, we know that she was the woman who chose to stand at the foot of the cross alongside Mary, the mother of Jesus, during his crucifixion. When the male apostles ran and hid, and who can really blame them, right? She stood in her convictions, and she was a face of love for Jesus to see in his final moments of suffering. We know that she is the witness to the very first Easter. She was chosen to witness Christ's resurrection. And she was commissioned to go out and spread the good news. And so she became the apostle to the apostles. Now, it is impossible to overstress the criticalness of this, that a woman was chosen to witness the first Easter, that a woman witnessed Christ's resurrection and was commissioned to share the good news. Certainly, Mary of Magdala is a leader in our Christian tradition, and it is because of Mary of Magdala that we have the tradition today as we know it. Now, I'm often challenged for saying that. I look at Joe LaGuardia over here. He's the one who challenges me. And we often talk about Paul being the reason that we have the tradition the way that we do today. And, absolutely Paul was a wonderful leader and a great marketer. And he was very smart to get rid of circumcision as a requirement to be a Christian. Absolutely. But without Mary going out and talking about the fact that she had witnessed this resurrection, where would we be today and how would we understand Christianity? It's such an important question to ask. Now, what we may not know about Mary of Magdala, is that she was an independent woman of means and that she used her resources to support the mission of Jesus. And we know that because of her name. She is Mary of Magdala, not Mary the wife of, not Mary the daughter of. She is called by her name and the city that she came from. And that is quite significant and rare for that time period. She was a woman who had choice. She was a woman who had voice. And she decided to utilize her resources to support the mission of Jesus. Now, as Sister Chris talked about, Mary of Magdala was not a prostitute. And sadly, Pope Gregory in the 6th century misread the gospel and confused her with somebody else and named her a prostitute. And shockingly, no one opened the gospel to figure it out for more than a millennium that it was a mistake. So in the late 1960s, it was discovered that this was an error. And rather than the Catholic Church, the Vatican, coming out and saying, we need to announce this, there was an error. Mary of Magdala was actually this incredible leader in our church and not a prostitute. They quietly changed liturgy and never made a statement. And so many today still do not know that Mary of Magdala was not a prostitute. And what better way to silence a woman than to call her a prostitute? Because how do we deem prostitution in the church and in society? We claim that prostitution is a sin of lust of the woman. But in fact, it is the sin of the objectification of a woman's body and sexuality. Now, Pope Francis recently said that women are the strawberries on the cake. And I will tell you, Mary of Magdala, no strawberry. She baked the cake, right? She was an incredibly courageous woman and certainly a leader in our church. And if we look around today, we have many modern examples of Mary of Magdala. Right here in this room, Sister Chris Schenk, Deborah Rose, Marie Graff, Laurel, I asked her how to say her last name, and I've already forgotten Laurel, I'm so sorry. Jarecki, Laurel Jarecki, I remembered. Examples of modern day Mary of Magdala's, recognizing where there's injustice and choosing to put their resources to work to call for positive social change. We see that in Sister Simone Campbell with Nuns on the Bus. And one of my favorites, Sister Margaret Farley, who wrote the book Just Love. After writing the book, she was put under investigation by Pope Benedict XVI, and her book was banned from every Catholic institution. Isn't it funny that right after that, her book went to the top 10 bestseller list on Amazon? And I just want to say that God does work in mysterious ways. And I see these women as our foremothers, but we also have women of a younger generation who are modeling Mary of Magdala. Kate McIlwee, who is the co-director of the Women's Ordination Conference. She's in Rome, and daily she's challenging the Vatican to recognize the full humanity of every person and to honor women's call to the priesthood. And Rhonda Miska, who did a great book called Catholic Women Speak, and if you don't have a copy, you really need to get one. And then I believe that we have Mary of Magdala's in training. And I like to call my daughter Sarah one of those. She's here. She's embarrassed. My daughter Sarah is feisty and kind-hearted and generous and loving, and she is a feminist just like her mama. My hands are full, I promise you, but I wouldn't have it any other way. Sarah asks questions. She's a critical thinker, and she says, "Mom, why are there no women priests on the altar?" And she also asks me, "Mom, can I have a career and not be a mother?" And I encourage her to ask these questions, and I think it's wonderful. And I want a church that encourages her to ask those questions as well. Now, Pope Francis recently gave a sermon, and he said that we really need to listen to one another, that we need to recognize that we don't always have the right answers, and that we need to hear the opinions of others, that we need to listen and consider the ways that we can work together. And so I wonder if perhaps Pope Francis could listen to us, to listen to this community calling for a church of renewal, a church for our daughters. Pope Francis also called for a year of mercy, a year where we can confess our sins and be forgiven. And what I want to know is if this is the year that the Vatican is going to confess its sins against women, against the LGBTQ community, and against all of those who've been oppressed by its patriarchal teachings. If we truly want a church for our daughters, we have to acknowledge what those patriarchal teachings are and to dismantle them, and to acknowledge that these are distortions of faith. Complementarity is highly problematic. Women have value beyond their wombs, and we need to acknowledge that. So what does a church for our daughters look like? A church for our daughters is one in where the full humanity of every person is honored, that we are all welcomed in full participation, that women are part of the leadership of the church. And Mary of Magdala, she is our example of what women are in the church, and now we need it to be acknowledged. And that can happen. That can certainly happen. As Sister Chris pointed out with her quote, it is the actions of small groups of people that make change. And I truly believe that. We all have voice, right? We all have voice. And although some may seek to silence us, we must be creative, and we must be strong, and we must stand steady and continue to work for this change. And though this change may not happen overnight, although our efforts may not come to fruit in our own lifetimes, they will transform society and our church for our daughters. So I call you, and I challenge you, and I challenge myself to be strong, to find our voices, to be fearless, and together we can build a church for our daughters. Thank you.